All right, a little over 30 days later with the S23 Ultra, right on the heels of the OnePlus 11, which, aside from the same stale design and new fugly camera setup on the back, I liked. And while Samsung's new baller level phone's design looks almost identical to last year's with some very slight changes, we get new and better cameras, better performance, better battery life, and better speakers. So it's just better, if you didn't already get that. Now, I'm gonna be straight up with you. I personally wouldn't rock this phone as my main because it's just too bloody big for my taste, but I do really like this simple design, so the standard S23 is probably more up my alley. I'm also not really a fan of Samsung's software experience. Like, first of all, they want you to sign up for like all the things, and there's always some bloody Samsung app I never use that wants to update, which is really annoying. But to me, the biggest sin is the 60 gigs in total of Samsung software and bloatware fresh out the box. Like, dude, come on. That's twice the size of Windows 11 in a phone. Anyways, according to DxOMark, aside from some small picture quality adjustments this year, we've got the same display monster as last year at 6.8 inches with Gorilla Glass Victus on both the front and back, AMOLED panel, QHD plus resolution with LTPO 2.0, 120Hz refresh rate, and of course the highest peak brightness levels out there at over 1750 nits. You know, typical Samsung high-end mobile display specs. No big deal. But this year, we get this new extra brightness toggle that brings the manual max brightness from 600 nits up to 1050. And with that said, don't be afraid to max out the resolution and refresh rate or use high brightness to save on battery, because personally, I don't think you need to. I mean, it's got the same 5,000 mAh battery as last year, but with the new Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, it feels like the battery capacity has doubled. Like, believe it or not, I usually get about 2 days out of this thing with almost 9 hours of screen on time, and that's at high brightness, you know, QHD plus resolution and the refresh rate in adaptive mode. That's really impressive. Now, I would have liked to see some improvements in the wired and wireless charging speeds though, with 45 watts wired fast charging having been around for a while now, and 15 watts for wireless charging being fairly standard depending on the brand. But I mean, I guess not coming with a charger in the box sucks even more, so I'm not really sure where I was going with that complaint. Anyways, getting back to the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, it's actually custom made for Samsung with ever so slightly higher clock speeds for both the CPU and GPU, which probably doesn't translate noticeably at all in day-to-day tasks. But launch a benchmark and you can brag to all your friends that you can score higher than they probably can. If you're a gamer, you'll be impressed with both the performance and ability to download plugins like PerfZ for monitoring your system's stats, but the big one here is the new Pause USB power delivery feature, which reroutes the charging power directly to the bits being used for gaming, which means less heat generated, which then means better performance. So if gaming performance is what you're after, this phone definitely stacks up against some of the most recent dedicated gaming phones. And if you prefer to play games or watch content with the built-in speakers, you'll be super happy with the audio quality because it sounds better across the board compared to last year's and has support for Dolby Atmos for media and gaming. Now, let's not forget about the S Pen. It's there, but from all the reading I've done, there's just nothing new about it. And by now, I'm pretty sure you all know what it can do and what it does, so let's move on and talk about these wicked new cameras, shall we? So there's a 200 megapixel main, a 10 megapixel periscope telephoto with 10 times zoom, another 10 megapixel telephoto with 3 times zoom, and the 12 megapixel ultra wide. Now, one thing that stood out to me right away was the awesome textures it captures. Super impressive stuff. Of course, colors, clarity, and sharpness are way up there, creating some really nice photos. Dynamic range is fantastic with the main camera, although it can still tend to overexpose on a few shots here and there depending on how strong and where the position of the sun is. And by default, the 200 megapixel main camera bins down to 12.5, which saves on file size, but also gives you all those zoom options, which is kind of the point of this phone. Manually switching to the 200 megapixel setting does greatly increase the overall photo quality due to simply having more data to work off of, which means you can crop in a lot more in post without losing nearly as much detail as you would by cropping in with the 12.5 megapixel photo. But the trade-off there is no zoom features and massive file sizes. So you could always split the difference and utilize the 50 megapixel photo mode for the smaller file sizes, but you still lose out on all those zoom features, and those zoom features are super impressive at about up to 20 times. 30 times is still usable, but I found it to be best used more for like informational purposes instead of trying to capture the moment, and 10x is just like unmatched by any phone. It's phenomenal. I'm still seeing a color temperature shift between the main and ultra-wide cameras, with the ultra-wide being a tad bit warmer than the main, and I do mean just a tad, so Samsung's obviously made some improvements there. Now, low light and night mode photos surprisingly aren't that impressive if I'm being perfectly honest. Like in standard mode with low light, there's quite a bit of noise, but at least most objects maintain a bit of sharpness. But when night mode's turned on, I'm seeing a lot of artifacts blooming from light sources like the sky or street lamps, as well as degradation in the sharpness and clarity. So works okay sometimes, but most of the time I'd probably just leave it in standard mode for those low light shots. 4K 30 FPS video looks wicked, super smooth lighting transitions, super smooth image stabilization, great colors, great exposure, literally zero complaints there. I would, however, really like to see Samsung figure out how to include the zoom features with 4K instead of just 1080 and below, so maybe next year, but probably not. The new 12 megapixel selfie cam works great. I kept taking pictures to push the dynamic range capabilities with both shadow and direct sun on my face, and it not only saved the highlights, it balanced out the shadows and nailed the skin tones while also keeping the foreground in check. Like, Samsung did a really good job with the selfie camera this year. So I think the S23 Ultra is a really nice improvement over last year's Ultra. I probably wouldn't recommend upgrading if you already have the S22 Ultra, but with a much better battery life and the new cameras, if those two things are important to you, if you're coming from like any other phone, I wouldn't tell you not to get the S23 Ultra. Anyways, that's gonna do it for this one. Make sure you subscribe, otherwise you'll miss out on my next video. But thanks as always for watching, and I'll talk to you all in the next one. Cheers.